The office breakroom it was a quiet Tuesday morning. The kind of morning where nothing dramatic was happening, but everything still felt a little heavy. The office was already filled with soft keyboard sounds, the low hum of printers, and the occasional click of heels on the linoleum floor. Sarah sat in the breakroom, a small, quiet space with white walls, an old microwave, and a water cooler that made bubbling sounds every few minutes. She had made herself a cup of green tea. Her usual choice, not because it was her favorite, but because it was light and simple, just like she preferred things to be. She sat alone at the corner table, watching the steam rise gently from her cup. Her eyes were not focused on anything in particular. She was just breathing, existing, taking a moment before diving back into spreadsheets, client emails, and task lists that never seemed to end. There was a bulletin board nearby filled with faded notices someone's birthday from last month, an outdated lost and found note, and an HR reminder about mental health support. Sarah had read them all before, but she glanced at them anyway, just to avoid looking at her phone. She didn't want to check her messages yet. She knew what would be there. Another request? Another reminder? Another favor someone needed from her. It wasn't always big things. Sometimes it was just someone needing help with a printer jam, or covering for a meeting, or taking notes during a team discussion. Small things, but they added up. And somehow, Sarah had become the person everyone asked for help. Not because she was obligated, not because it was in her job description, but because she always said yes. As she sat there, lost in that familiar loop of thoughts, the door opened and in walked Julie, a coworker from the same floor. Julie smiled as she stepped inside, holding her phone in one hand and a half-empty coffee cup in the other. Her smile was friendly, but rushed like someone already thinking about the next thing they had to do. "Hey, Sarah," Julie said, walking toward the coffee machine. "You got a minute?" Sarah looked up. "Sure." Julie filled her cup with fresh coffee and then turned around, leaning casually against the counter. "So, I just found out I need to leave early today. My kid's school called something about a teacher conference. I was wondering if you could cover the last hour of my shift. Just keep an eye on the phones. It's usually quiet anyway." Sarah paused for a second, just a second. But that pause felt huge to her. In that small gap of silence, her mind filled with thoughts. I already stayed late yesterday. I told myself I'd leave on time today. I really need to get to the grocery store before it closes. I haven't had dinner at a decent hour in days. But if I say no, she think I'm being difficult. She's asked me before, and I said yes. What if she thinks I've changed? What if she tells others I'm unreliable? So without another thought, Sarah said, "Yeah, sure, I can do that." Julie smiled in relief. "You're a lifesaver." "Thanks. Really, I owe you." And just like that, she left the room. Sarah looked at her tea. It had gone cold. There was nothing dramatic in that moment. No outburst, no argument, no visible pain. But inside Sarah, something quietly shifted. A small, barely noticeable shift. Like when a book on a shelf slightly leans to one side, not enough to fall, but enough to be out of place. She didn't feel proud of helping. She didn't feel happy that someone appreciated her. She didn't even feel used. She just felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. It was a kind of emotional tiredness that builds up slowly over time, so quietly that you barely notice it until it becomes the background of your life. Like white noise. Like a dull ache that never completely goes away. She finished her tea in one slow sip and placed the empty cup in the sink. As she returned to her desk, she walked past people chatting by the printer, someone laughing at a meme on their phone, and someone else talking loudly on a call. Nobody looked at her. Nobody knew she had just agreed to stay late again. Nobody thought about whether she had plans, or if she was tired, or if she simply didn't want to, and Sarah didn't expect them to. Because for as long as she could remember, she had made it her responsibility to make things easier for others. She didn't like conflict. She didn't want to be seen as selfish. She wanted to be helpful, dependable, good, but slowly. That word, good, had started to feel like a burden. Being good had turned into always being available, always smiling, always saying yes, always being the one who understood, who adjusted, who sacrificed, who compromised, and now, being good felt like being invisible. Later that afternoon, when the office started to quiet down and people packed their bags to leave, Sarah stayed at her desk, watching the clock, waiting for Julie's shift to end so she could take over. The light from the window was soft and golden. The air felt still, her shoulders ached, her back was stiff. But more than that, her spirit felt flat. She didn't hate anyone. She wasn't angry, but something inside her whispered, "Why do you always come second to everyone else?" It wasn't the first time she had heard that whisper, but this time she didn't brush it away. She sat with it. She allowed it to be there, even if she didn't have an answer yet. That evening, as she walked home under the pale sky, Sarah thought about the small moment in the break room. A 5-second request, a 2-word answer, but the weight of that interaction stayed with her. She remembered the way she didn't even consider herself before agreeing. She remembered the pause, the conflict, the disappointment in herself afterward. Not because of Julie, but because she had ignored her own needs. Again, maybe that moment wasn't big. Maybe it wasn't loud. But for Sarah, it was the beginning of a quiet realization. Something needed to change. The family dinner. It was Sunday evening. The air was still and warm, and the sky outside was turning a soft blue-gray as the sun prepared to disappear. Sarah stood in her parents' kitchen, stirring a pot of lentils on the stove. The kitchen smelled of turmeric, garlic, and roasted cumin. Her mother had already set the table. Her father was in the living room, scrolling through the TV channels, and her younger sister Nadia was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, tapping away on her phone. Dinner at her parents' house was a weekly tradition. Every Sunday without fail. It wasn't forced, everyone came on their own. But there was an unspoken rule that missing dinner without a solid reason was frowned upon. Sarah never missed it. She was always on time, always helpful, always kind. As usual, she arrived a bit early to help her mother with the cooking. She peeled vegetables, set out plates, and asked questions like, "How's your back these days? And did you talk to Aunt Salma about her checkup?" These weren't just words. Sarah truly cared. She just didn't always know how to care for herself the same way. Her mother moved slowly that day, complaining softly about her knees. So Sarah took over most of the tasks, assuring her mother gently, "I've got this, you just rest a little." Number one else offered to help. By the time dinner was ready, Sarah had laid out the food, refilled the water jugs, and even wiped down the kitchen counter. Her father called out from the living room, "Is it ready?" And when she said yes, everyone came to the table, chatting about random things, politics, traffic, someone's new baby. They sat around the table, her father at the head, her mother beside him, then Nadia, and Sarah at the far end. The food was warm and comforting. Fresh roti, lentils, chicken curry, and a side salad. It wasn't a feast, but it was enough. Everyone began to eat. Her father commented on the TV news. Nadia scrolled through her phone with one hand and ate with the other. Her mother quietly nibbled at her food and occasionally looked at Sarah with a soft, tired smile. She appreciated her help, even if she didn't say it aloud. Halfway through the meal, Nadia paused and looked at her plate. "This dal tastes different," she said, wrinkling her nose. Sarah didn't look up right away. She just continued eating. Quietly, her mother looked up from her plate and replied gently, "Sarah made it today." Nadia leaned back in her chair slightly. That makes sense. It's not bad, just ... not like usual. A little too much garlic, maybe? There was no malice in Nadia's tone. It was casual offhand, like someone making a passing comment. But to Sarah, the words landed with a quiet sting. She didn't react. She didn't defend herself. She didn't say, "You could have helped." She didn't explain that she followed their mother's instructions or that she was juggling 3 dishes at once. She just smiled lightly and nodded. "Maybe," she said softly. The conversation moved on. Her father talked about electricity bills going up again. Nadia showed a photo on her phone of a new bag she wanted. Her mother got up mid-meal to bring yogurt from the fridge, and Sarah continued eating quietly, her appetite slowly fading. No. One noticed after dinner, everyone moved toward the living room. Her father leaned back in his chair, her mother sat nearby with her feet propped up, and Nadia turned on a show. Sarah, as always, began clearing the table. She picked up the used plates, gathered the leftover food, covered the pots, and took the dishes to the sink. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for help. It had become a habit and expectation, almost. If she didn't do it, it felt like something was incomplete, like the evening hadn't ended properly. The sink was full. She rolled up her sleeves, turned on the tap, and began washing the dishes one by one. The warm water ran over her hands, and the sound of the sponge scrubbing against the plates filled the kitchen. From the living room, she could hear laughter. Someone said something funny, and the others chuckled. The sound felt distant, like it belonged to a different place, a different mood. As Sarah stood at the sink, her back slightly aching and her hands wet, she felt something shift again, just like in the break room earlier that week. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was a soft kind of realization. A quiet question in the back of her mind. Why am I always the one standing while others sit? She had always thought of herself as kind, helpful, dependable. Those were traits she took pride in, but now those same traits felt like a weight. Why? Was it so automatic for her to step up? Why didn't anyone else feel the need to do the same? She wasn't trying to be better than anyone. She didn't expect praise. But she was starting to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Unseen. She finished the dishes and wiped her hands on a towel. She looked around the quiet kitchen. Everything was clean in its place, just the way she liked it. But inside, she didn't feel calm. She walked to the living room and sat at the edge of the couch. No one asked where she had been. No one offered a thank you. They were watching a comedy show, laughing at jokes, passing comments. Sarah sat there quietly, trying to join the mood, but feeling a little out of place. Later that night, when it was time to leave, her father gave her a casual wave. Her mother reminded her to drive safely. Nadia was still on her phone. Sarah stepped outside. The evening air was cooler now. She took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and walked toward her car. She wasn't upset with anyone. She didn't feel like a victim, but she did feel tired in a new way, a tiredness that came from constantly being the one who gives while others receive, from being helpful without question, from staying quiet when something felt unfair. That night, back in her apartment, Sarah sat on her bed and thought about her evening. She thought about the comment on her food. She thought about washing dishes alone. She thought about all the Sundays she had done the same thing, and for the first time, she allowed herself to admit a quiet truth. She didn't enjoy these dinners as much as she used to. She didn't want to stop coming. She loved her family, but she wanted to show up as a daughter and a sister, not as unpaid help, not as someone to silently carry the weight of responsibility while others relaxed. She didn't need anyone to apologize. She didn't need grand gestures. She just needed space to be a person with her own needs. She needed her effort to be seen, not taken for granted. And most of all, she needed to feel that she could say no, or ask for help, or just be without guilt. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't about the dishes. It wasn't even about the comment. It was about years of quiet behavior, unspoken assumptions, and patterns that had never been questioned. That night, as she turned off her lamp and laid her head on the pillow, Sarah didn't feel angry or restless. She felt a little clearer, a little stronger. She still didn't have a plan. She wasn't going to confront anyone or make big changes right away. But something inside her was slowly waking up. For so long, she had believed that being easygoing meant staying quiet, that being kind meant accepting everything, that being a good person meant always giving more than she received. Now, she was starting to believe something new. Being kind doesn't mean disappearing. The quiet walk the next morning started like most others. Sarah woke up to the faint sound of her phone vibrating on her nightstand. She didn't rush to check it. She stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the sounds of a slowly waking world, the faint noise of a car passing outside, a dog barking in the distance, a neighbor's front gate creaking. Her apartment was quiet. It always was. But today the silence felt different. Less empty, more welcoming. She got out of bed slowly, stretched her back, and made her way to the kitchen. She put the kettle on for tea and opened the curtains. Soft morning light spilled into the room. It wasn't dramatic or golden. Just soft, simple daylight, the kind that makes everything feel still. Sarah didn't have work that day. It was her day off, a small window of time she usually filled with errands, chores, or helping others. But today she didn't feel like doing any of that. She didn't have the energy to give. Not because she was angry, but because she just felt quiet. Inside, not sad, not broken, just quiet. After breakfast, she looked at her phone. A few unread messages. One from a coworker asking if she could help with an outline for a project. Another from her cousin asking if she'd be free to help her move some boxes later in the week. Sarah looked at the screen, then locked the phone again and placed it face down on the table. She didn't reply, not right away. She wasn't ignoring them, she just needed space. She changed into comfortable clothes, tied her hair loosely, and stepped outside. She didn't know where she was going, but her feet naturally led her to the small park a few blocks away. It wasn't anything fancy, just a couple of walking paths, a small pond, and a few benches scattered under trees. But it was quiet, and today that was enough. As she entered the park, she felt her shoulders drop a little. The air smelled like damp earth and morning leaves. A few joggers passed by, some with headphones, some with dogs. There were birds chirping in short bursts, the leaves rustling gently in the breeze, and the distant sound of traffic muffled by trees. Sarah walked slowly. There was no rush, no destination. She wasn't trying to get steps in or burn calories. She just wanted to be outside, away from expectation, away from people needing things, away from the feeling of always being on call. She passed a bench under a tree and paused. Then she sat down. It was an ordinary bench. Wooden, a little worn, but steady. The tree above her provided shade, and sunlight flickered through the branches in soft patches. She sat there with her hands resting in her lap and looked out over the park. She watched a squirrel digging in the grass, a little boy learning to ride a bike, his father walking slowly beside him, an old woman feeding birds near the pond. Nothing extraordinary was happening, but everything felt still and whole. Sarah took a deep breath, closed her eyes briefly, and let the air fill her lungs. For the first time in what felt like weeks, she wasn't thinking about what someone else needed. She wasn't preparing to explain herself or trying to sound helpful. She wasn't adjusting her schedule or waiting for someone to notice her effort. She was just sitting, and in that quiet, something honest rose up in her. A question she had buried under years of kindness and accommodation. When was the last time I did something just for me? Not out of guilt. Not because someone asked. Not because it would look good or make someone's life easier. Just for herself. She tried to remember. Was it a painting class she took years ago? A solo trip to the bookstore where she stayed for hours? A day when she turned off her phone and took a nap without apology? Each memory was distant, faint. She realized she had spent so long shaping her days around other people's needs that she no longer remembered what her needs even looked like. And the saddest part? No one had asked her either. No one had said, "What do you need today?" No one had said, "You've been helping a lot lately, are you okay?" No one had said, "You don't have to say yes every time." But maybe that wasn't their job. Maybe that had to start with her. Maybe she needed to be the one to say, "I matter too." She looked around again. People came and went. A man jogged past, giving her a quick nod. A couple walked by with matching coffee cups. A child squealed with joy as they chased a butterfly. The world was moving, gently, without her needing to move with it, and that brought her peace. She stayed on the bench for a long time. Minutes passed, maybe more. She didn't check her watch. She didn't feel bored. There was something healing in the stillness. It wasn't that her problems disappeared. They were still there, the expectations, the favors, the quiet disappointment that came with being overlooked. But for this moment, none of that touched her. Because she had chosen to step out of the cycle, just for a morning, just for herself eventually. She stood up and started walking again. Not with urgency, but with clarity. Her pace was slow, her breath calm. She felt grounded, as if something deep inside had settled. Not solved, not resolved, but seen. And that mattered. As she left the park, she reached for her phone and opened the messages again. She read them more slowly this time. Not with guilt, but with distance. She realized that both requests could wait. No one would suffer if she took a few hours to answer. And maybe she didn't have to say yes to both. She didn't delete the messages. She didn't ignore them. She just acknowledged that her time wasn't automatic. Her energy wasn't unlimited. Her kindness wasn't a free resource. And if she didn't protect it, no one else would. Back at home, she made herself lunch. Simple food, just rice and vegetables, but she ate slowly, with care. She played soft music in the background and left. Her phone on the kitchen counter, out of reach. Later, she opened a notebook she hadn't used in months and wrote 3 sentences at the top of a fresh page. I can take time for myself without feeling guilty. I am not required to solve everyone's problems. I deserve rest, even when no one sees me working. She read them again, then closed the notebook. There was no big transformation, no overnight change. But something inside her had shifted just a little more. She wasn't planning to become a different person. She wasn't going to start saying no to everything or cut people off. That wasn't who she was. But she was learning the quiet power of choice, choosing when to say yes, choosing when to pause, choosing herself gently, firmly, without apology. It was the start of something. Not a rebellion, not a statement, just a return to the parts of herself she had forgotten in the busyness of pleasing others. That quiet morning walk, unnoticed by anyone else, became a memory Sarah would return to often. Not because something happened, but because nothing did. And in that nothing, she had finally heard herself again. The simple no, it was a typical Wednesday. The kind of day that didn't stand out. Gray skies, a light breeze, and the subtle sound of tires passing over wet pavement. Sarah arrived at the office just before 9 a.m., as she always did. She carried her usual tote bag with a book inside she hadn't yet had time to read. Her steps were steady, her breath calm, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel rushed. The office building smelled faintly of fresh coffee and printed paper. Phones rang in the background and people were already gathered around. The breakroom, pouring coffee and exchanging polite small talk. Sarah smiled when greeted, nodded in her familiar warm way, and went straight to her desk. Her calendar was full, but manageable. She had meetings lined up, tasks organized, emails flagged. A small part of her felt a quiet sense of pride. She was reliable, and she knew it. But today she wasn't going to mistake reliability for self-erasure. Around mid-morning, Sarah was reviewing a document when a familiar voice spoke from behind her. It was Jenna, a coworker from the floor above. "Hey, Sarah, got a sec?" Sarah turned, giving her full attention. "Sure, what's up?" Jenna smiled, a bit sheepish. "I hate to ask again, but I've got a dentist appointment that ran late, and I'm supposed to present at the team update meeting in about 45 minutes. Would you be able to fill in for me and just walk through my slides? You've seen the project before." There was nothing rude in the request. Jenna wasn't pushing, she was just asking. And Sarah had done this kind of thing many times before, always. Without hesitation. It was part of the pattern. Someone asked, Sarah agreed, and life moved on. People had grown used to Sarah being the backup plan, the safe option, but something inside her paused. Not the automatic pause filled with guilt or anxiety. This pause was different. It came from clarity. In that single moment, Sarah became aware of her energy, not just her schedule, but her capacity. She remembered the park bench from a few days ago, the soft breeze, the stillness. She remembered the peace she felt when she did not fill her time with other people's plans. And today, her plate was already full. She had her own deadlines, her own thoughts she was finally starting to listen to. She didn't want to rearrange her day for someone else again. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally cared enough about herself to pause. So she smiled gently and said, "I won't be able to this time, Jenna. I have a few things lined up that I need to focus on." Jenna blinked. She wasn't expecting that. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, not in frustration but in mild surprise. Sarah's answer wasn't harsh or defensive, it was simply honest. "Oh, okay," Jenna replied, recovering quickly. "No problem, I'll figure something out." She offered a polite smile and turned to walk away. Sarah sat still for a few seconds after that. Her heart wasn't racing. She didn't feel like she had done something wrong. In fact, she felt calm. Peaceful, grounded. There was no drama, no fallout, no confrontation, and that was the part that struck her the most. All those years she had feared that saying no would cause a problem, that people would get upset, pull away, label her selfish. But none of that happened. Jenna asked. Sarah said no. Jenna accepted it. The world didn't fall apart. The office didn't freeze. No one raised their voice. It was just normal. And yet for Sarah, it was quietly life-changing. Throughout the day, she returned to that moment in her mind. Not to overthink it, but to acknowledge it. For the first time, she had chosen her own time, her own priorities. Without apology. She had always thought that boundaries had to be loud to be effective. But now she was realizing that the softest no could be the strongest. Later that afternoon, Sarah went to the break room for tea. She stood by the counter, pouring hot water over a tea bag, letting it steep. Another coworker, Priya, joined her. "I heard Jenna had to cover her own presentation today," Priya said casually, stirring sugar into her coffee. "She usually gets someone to step in." Sarah smiled softly. "Yeah, she asked me, but I had things going on." Priya looked at her, then nodded slowly. "Good for you." That was it. Just those 3 words, not dramatic, not sarcastic. Just genuine. Sarah nodded back, and the 2 women stood in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their drinks. There was something unspoken in that moment, a shared understanding, a quiet agreement that protecting your energy wasn't wrong. That it was okay to exist for yourself, even in a world that constantly asked you to stretch further. As the day wrapped up, Sarah packed her things at her own pace. She didn't stay late. She didn't check her inbox one last time. She simply closed her laptop, picked up her bag, and walked out of the office with a clear mind. Outside, the sky had begun to open up. The clouds had lifted slightly, revealing patches of soft color, faded blue, pale orange. The kind of sky that didn't try to impress anyone, yet felt beautiful anyway. On the walk to her car, Sarah thought about all the yes answers she had given in the past, not just at work, but in life, the parties she went to just because someone insisted, the favors she did that cost her time and peace, the conversations where she listened deeply but didn't speak her truth, the way she smiled through discomfort to keep things nice. The time she gave when she barely had anything left. She wasn't angry at those memories. She wasn't ashamed of them either. She understood now that those moments came from a desire to be kind, to be good, to belong. And that was human, but she also understood that kindness doesn't mean saying yes to everything. That being a good person doesn't mean abandoning yourself every time someone else needs something, that people don't respect you more when you erase yourself for them. They just get used to it. And that realization wasn't bitter. It was freeing. When she got home that evening, she made dinner for herself, something simple. She lit a candle on the table, just for ambiance. She sat down and ate without multitasking, without checking emails, without rushing. Afterward, she sat near the window, sipping warm water and watching the sky turn to dusk. She thought about how gentle her day had been. Not because it was easy, but because she had honored her own limits. She had let one small, respectful no open the door to something greater. Balance. She no longer needed to explain herself to everyone. She didn't owe the world a reason for choosing peace. For years, she had over-explained her decisions, hoping others would approve. But now, she was beginning to trust herself enough to simply decide, and let that be enough. That night, she journaled for the first time in weeks. She wrote down the following. Today I said no. No one was hurt. Nothing collapsed. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. And just like that, a small piece of her old pattern fell away. Not with a dramatic goodbye. Not with a declaration. Just a gentle step toward herself. She closed the journal, turned off the lamp, and got ready for bed. As she lay under the covers, she didn't replay conversations in her head. She didn't wonder if she had let someone down. She didn't anticipate a response or wait for a reaction. She simply rested because for the first time in a long while, she had nothing to prove and nothing to fix. She had just lived her day simply and truly as her own. The peace of being herself. Weeks passed, not with any grand announcements, not with sweeping changes, and certainly not with drama. Life continued around Sarah just as it always had. Emails came in, meetings were scheduled, laundry piled up, the grocery list grew, and family dinners kept happening every Sunday. On the surface, nothing seemed different. But beneath that surface, in the quiet center of her own life, everything was beginning to feel more stable, more real. Sarah hadn't become a different person. She still smiled when she greeted people. She still helped her coworkers. She still cared deeply about her friends and family. But the way she moved through the world had changed. She no longer rushed to fix things. For everyone else, she no longer replied instantly to every message, especially the ones that came with unspoken expectations. She no longer offered her time and energy so freely that she forgot she needed rest. 2. She had begun living with what she called quiet boundaries. Nothing loud or sharp, just small decisions made gently in her favor. She didn't try to explain them to people who weren't listening. She didn't apologize when she chose to prioritize herself. She simply allowed herself to exist, not as a helper, not as a backup, not as a giver of endless yeses, but as a whole, independent person. And strangely, the more she stepped back from overgiving, the more clearly she could see how much of her old life had been built around invisible pressure. There were moments that tested her. A colleague stopped by her desk one day and asked if she could stay late to review a presentation. Sarah smiled, checked her calendar, and said, "I have something else planned tonight, so I can't today. Let me know if there's another time." The colleague looked briefly surprised, then nodded. "Sure, no worries." Another time, her sister Nadia called her up with a last-minute favor. Could Sarah pick up something on her way to dinner? Sarah paused, looked at her own list of errands, and replied gently, "I've already had a full day, so I won't be able to." "Maybe you can check if Mom has it?" Nadia sighed, slightly annoyed, but didn't argue. Sarah didn't feel the need to fill the silence. She let the discomfort pass naturally. These kinds of interactions, which once would have left Sarah overthinking for hours, now came and went like small waves. She wasn't cold, she wasn't distant, she was just centered. She had learned something important. Peace doesn't require permission. It doesn't come from getting every detail right. It doesn't come from pleasing everyone around you. It doesn't come from being liked or agreed with or even appreciated. It comes from knowing that your choices are aligned with your truth, even when no one claps. For you. Sarah still cared deeply, but now she cared without sacrificing herself. She still helped others, but only when she had the energy to do so. Without resentment, she still showed up, but no longer at the cost of her rest, health, or honesty. What changed most was how she treated herself when no one else was watching. Before, if someone was disappointed by her, she'd internalize it. She'd lie awake wondering if she should have done more. But now, she had learned to let those feelings exist without letting them define her. She had learned how to sit with other people's discomfort and not rush to erase it. She had learned that not every silence needs to be filled. She had learned how to be proud of the choices no one ever saw her make. One afternoon, she went back to the same park where she had sat weeks earlier. It was a weekend, and the sun was high but not harsh. She walked the same path, past the same bench, past the small pond, the tall trees. The families gathered on picnic blankets. She found a new bench and sat down. She didn't bring a book. She didn't open her phone. She just watched. People moved around her with purpose and noise and laughter. But inside, she was still, and she realized, this is what it feels like to be in your own life, not running from one demand to another, but choosing how to be in each moment. She noticed things she used to overlook. The way the leaves curled at the edges, the soft murmur of wind through tree branches, the quiet rhythm of her own breath. Her phone buzzed. A message. She read it slowly. Someone asking if she could give feedback on a draft. Whenever you have time, but soon please. She smiled, and instead of replying instantly, she locked the screen and placed the phone in her bag. She would reply when she truly had time. It wasn't selfish. It was real. It was balance. Back at home that evening, Sarah changed into comfortable clothes and sat by the window with a cup of tea. The kind of tea she used to let grow cold in the break room. The kind she now drank hot with her full attention. She thought about the word she used to live by. Good. For years, she tried to be a good daughter, a good friend, a good colleague. Now, she had replaced that word with something better. True, she didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be true to herself, to her needs, to her time, to her energy. That night, as she prepared for bed, she looked around her apartment. Nothing had changed physically. The same furniture, the same walls, the same soft hum of the fridge in the background, but the space felt different. Not because it was quieter, but because she was quieter inside, not hollow, not numb, but clear, and in that clarity she felt peace. Not the kind that's dramatic or overwhelming. Not the kind you post about or announce, but the kind that makes your chest feel lighter, your thoughts feel slower, and your heart feel steady. She no longer needed people to say thank you, to feel seen. She no longer needed to say yes to everything. To feel worthy. She no longer needed to explain why she chose rest, or solitude, or silence. She had finally arrived at the most important realization. Pleasing people is endless. But choosing yourself leads to peace, and that was enough.